The email came on a Tuesday afternoon, nestled between a quarterly report and a coffee break. The subject line read, Annual Lakewood Family Reunion. Save the date. It was cheerful, bright, full of exclamation marks. My sister Amelia even attached a pastel flyer with beach chairs, flip-flops, and phrases like can't wait to see everyone. Everyone but me. I sat there staring at it, not shocked, not really, because this wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the second. Over the years, I'd become something like the invisible branch on the family tree. Still attached, but always left out of the holiday photos, the group chats, the whispered plans that skipped right over my name. I'm Harper Lane, and this is not a revenge story. It's a story about silence, about the things we swallow because we don't want to make a scene, about being the dependable one, the quiet achiever, the person who always said, it's fine, even when it wasn't. It's about how sometimes the people who know you best forget who you really are until you remind them. This isn't the story of a tantrum. It's the story of a transition. Because while my family was busy planning another lakeside weekend without me, I was finalizing a very different kind of RSVP, the kind that comes with deeds, documents, and decisions, the kind that makes people sit up and say, wait, she did what? But before we get there, I want to take you back. Not just to that email, but to the quiet spaces where the story really began, not in big dramatic fights, but in tiny, overlooked moments. The dinner tables where no one asked how work was going, the birthdays forgotten, the milestones ignored, the years I spent turning pain into power while no one was watching. You might think this is about money. It's not. It's about voice, about value, about reclaiming the place they said you never really earned. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you how I did it, not to shame anyone, but to remind you that sometimes the best response isn't louder. It's smarter, and sometimes the best seat at the table is the one you build yourself. So pull up a chair. You'll want to stay for this reunion. I wish I could tell you it was an oversight, that my name missing from the invite list was a simple mistake like a typo or a spam folder glitch. But when it happens more than once, you stop blaming technology. You start noticing patterns, and this one had been repeating for years. The annual Lakewood family reunion wasn't just a barbecue at a lakeside cabin. It was a tradition full of stories, matching t-shirts, three-legged races, and arguments over who makes the best potato salad. Growing up, it had been the one weekend where everyone showed up. Cousins from different coasts, great uncles with fishing rods, toddlers chasing beach balls in the sun. I used to love it, until the invitations stopped arriving. The first time I reached out to Amelia, my older sister and self-appointed organizer, she told me there had been limited space at the lodge and they assumed I'd be too busy with work anyway. The second year, no one mentioned it at all. I saw the photos on Facebook like a stranger peeking through someone else's window. Laughter, fireworks, group hugs. I wasn't angry, just emptied. I think people expect some grand betrayal to cause distance in families. But sometimes it's not a blowout fight. It's 1,000 quiet exclusions. A calendar update you're not copied on, a group photo you're not asked to join, an invite that never comes not because you weren't wanted, but because you weren't remembered. It took me years to admit how much that stung. To say out loud, I wanted to be there. I wanted someone to look around the picnic blanket and ask, where's Harper? Instead, I became a silent absence, easier to forget than confront. But here's what I've learned, silence can be a mirror. It shows you who sees you and who never did. And once you notice that truth, you can't unsee it. So, when the reunion flyer hit my inbox this year, brightly designed, carefully worded, cheerfully excluding something shifted. Not in a loud, vengeful way, but in that quiet place inside me where decisions are made. This time, I wasn't going to reply with a forced smile or an "it's okay, maybe next year." I wasn't going to ask for a seat at their table. I was going to build one of my own. And that began with a phone call, not to my family, but to a real estate agent. You don't become invisible overnight. It happens slowly, like wallpaper fading from years of sunlight or footsteps softening the creak in old wooden floors. At first, you don't even realize it's happening. You just notice how often your stories go unheard, how your wins are met with polite nods instead of cheers, how the spotlight never quite turns your way. For me, it started around 12, that tender age where girls begin to wonder who they are in the world and, more importantly, who sees them. Amelia was already the golden child varsity valedictorian, visibly adored. My older brother Eli was the wild card, always in trouble, but charming enough to make it look like a performance. And me, I was the reliable one, the helper, the one who set the table, not the one with the seat of honor. I remember one summer vividly, Dad had brought everyone to the lake house to celebrate Amelia's college acceptance. There were speeches, toasts, even a slideshow. That same week, I'd quietly received my own letter, a full scholarship to a state university for business analytics. I showed Mom. She smiled, said, "Good for you," and went back to frosting Amelia's cake. Those moments add up. When you're young, you think next time will be different. That maybe if you achieve more, speak louder, stay later, someone will finally say, "Look at her. She did that." But eventually, you stop waiting. You learn not to expect applause. You learn how to clap for yourself not out of pride, but out of necessity. And in those quiet years, I built more than a resume. I built a sense of self that didn't require permission to be proud. I worked late, got promoted, took risks. I became a name on executive boards while still being the one who probably works in admin at family dinners. It's funny how the people who change your life the most are the ones who forget to notice it. But I remembered everything. Every overlooked success, every polite dismissal, every time I was told, "Let's talk about you later," and later never came. So when I saw that reunion flyer this year, I didn't just see a beach trip. I saw a pattern, one that I no longer needed to fit into. And somewhere between memory and resolve, I realized I had a decision to make. If I couldn't rewrite the past, I could at least reshape what came next, which is exactly what I intended to do, starting with a lake house and a plan. The thing about being overlooked for long enough is that eventually you stop playing catch up. You stop explaining yourself. You stop needing anyone's permission to take up space. Instead, you get quietly strategic. You stop waiting for a seat at the table and start building something sturdier, something no one can ignore. That's what I did. 3 days after the reunion email landed in my inbox, I was on a video call with a real estate agent named Jordan Reyes. He specialized in lakeside properties and had the kind of warm, professional voice that made you feel like you already belonged there. Funny thing, he said, flipping through paperwork, the old Lakewood family property just came back on the market. I smiled, slow and quiet. That's the one. My parents had co-owned the house for decades, but financial strain and a few bad investment decisions had left it in shaky condition. I'd overheard whispers at Christmas about second mortgages, mounting repairs, property taxes piling up. It turns out nostalgia can't keep the roof from leaking. Jordan walked me through the process. Within a week, I submitted an all-cash offer through my holding company, a legal entity I'd created for consulting ventures, but now it would serve a much more personal purpose. The house that once held every family gathering now belonged to me, not out of revenge, not to gloat, but because some legacies deserve to be protected by the people who remember their value, not just the ones who show up for the food and fireworks. Owning it meant I could restore it, reinvent it, reclaim the space I once tiptoed around in hopes of being noticed. It also meant the reunion would happen on my terms. No more backseat, no more polite silence. This time, I wouldn't be attending. I'd be hosting. And my guest list, let's just say it was about to get interesting. Buying the lake house gave me more than ownership, it gave me leverage. And for the first time in my life, I had something my family couldn't ignore. But I didn't want a confrontation. I wasn't interested in drama or proving a point by shutting people out. I wanted to rewrite the script, and I wanted to do it with grace. So I made a plan, not a revenge plan, but a reintroduction. Instead of canceling the reunion or outing myself as the new owner, I decided to host it exactly as Amelia envisioned. Same weekend, same location, same fun, casual dress code, only now the person signing the catering checks and finalizing the guest list wasn't the big sister with the clipboard, it was me. I reached out to my assistant Micah, who was more excited than I was. "You're turning a passive-aggressive family event into a power move," he grinned. "This is legendary." We hired a design team to restore the deck, repaint the shutters, and replant the overgrown garden beds with native blooms. I replaced the creaky bunk beds with plush mattresses, restocked the pantry with everyone's favorite snacks, and hung photos in the hallway, real ones, including some of me for once. But I added one small twist: everyone would receive their official invitation by courier, a gold embossed envelope, a wax seal. No more mass emails, no "oops, we forgot to CC Harper." This year, no one would question who was behind it all, even if they didn't realize it at first. Here's what I've learned from years of being dismissed. If you want people to see you differently, you can't just raise your voice. You have to shift the room. And the reunion, it wasn't about punishing them. It was about reclaiming the space they assumed I'd surrendered. Because the most powerful kind of return isn't loud or vengeful, it's quiet, beautiful, and undeniable. And the moment they'd walk through that door, they'd know something was different. They arrived on a Friday afternoon early as always. Amelia's SUV was first packed with color-coded tote bags and her husband's golf clubs. Eli followed close behind, blasting music, his two toddlers still sticky from a road trip full of juice boxes. And then came Mom and Dad in the same silver minivan they'd been driving since high school drop-offs. I watched from the upstairs balcony, coffee in hand heels, already clicking softly on polished hardwood. My suitcase was packed for the upcoming board meeting in Tokyo, but that could wait. This moment, this homecoming, had taken years to build. I heard the first signs of confusion when Amelia's key didn't fit. "That's weird," she mumbled. "I just used it last summer." Then came the knock. I opened the door, slowly stepping forward in tailored linen and soft Louboutins, the kind you buy yourself after closing your third consecutive quarter in profit. The kind that say, "I don't need to shout, I'm already heard." Harper, Mom blinked. "What are you? How did you?" "Welcome home," I said with a smile that didn't need an explanation. "Please come in, I've been expecting you." They moved slowly, like people entering a dream they didn't quite understand. The familiar furniture had been polished. The smell of lemon oil and fresh peonies filled the air, and in the hallway next to our childhood photos was a new frame. A news article with my name on the byline: Finance Leader Harper Lane spearheads historic international merger. No one spoke. They didn't have to. Their silence for once said everything. Because there's a certain weight in presence, a certain kind of power in being still, being sure, being exactly who you said you'd become, just waiting for the world to catch up. I offered coffee, Colombian roast, Dad's favorite, set the mugs on the reclaimed oak table, smiled. This wasn't a confrontation, it was a reveal. And in that quiet moment, it was clear they were no longer in charge of the narrative. I was. Dinner that night felt surreal. The dining room glowed with candlelight, the table set with linen napkins and handmade ceramic plates. Micah had arranged a seasonal menu with the private chef grilled salmon lemon risotto and roasted vegetables. It was elegant but familiar, like something out of a memory, only better dressed. Amelia kept glancing at the newly framed article by the fireplace. "So, this merger thing," she started cautiously. "It's kind of a big deal." I nodded, keeping my voice calm. "It's the biggest in our company's history. I led the negotiations across 3 continents." There was silence again, the stunned kind. Not one of them had ever asked what I did beyond, "Are you still working in finance?" They'd always assumed it was spreadsheets and long hours, the kind of job that made you forget birthdays. But it wasn't forgetfulness, it was focus. And they never asked. So I filled in the blanks. The promotions, the Harvard MBA, the consulting firm I built from scratch, the board seats, the scholarships I funded anonymously at our old high school, the nonprofit I advised on weekends. Eli stared at his glass. Mom blinked too many times. Dad cleared his throat and asked, "Why didn't you ever tell us all this?" I smiled gently. "I did, I just don't think you were listening." That wasn't bitterness, it was fact. And here's the truth. Success feels different when no one claps for you. You learn to clap quietly, to celebrate in silence, to hang your own degrees, to frame your own wins. But being seen, truly seen, even if it comes late, still matters. Because sometimes the loudest applause is the pause in a room full of people who finally understand they underestimated you. And for the first time, it felt like they were listening, not out of obligation, but out of awe. The next morning, the house was quiet in a way I hadn't felt before. Not empty, but still. Like everyone was waiting to see what I'd say next. And I had a feeling it was time to stop letting silence fill the gaps. Over breakfast, I pulled out a simple folder labeled Reunion Logistics. Inside printed schedules, room assignments, and a list of group activities with one new addition. Everyone will be sharing one reflection, I explained, passing the papers around the table. Something you regret not saying or asking over the years. Doesn't have to be dramatic, just real. There were nervous glances, but no protests. This wasn't about forcing reconciliation. It was about creating space for honesty. Because family can't grow if it keeps skipping the hard parts. We avoid awkwardness, hoping time will smooth things over. But time doesn't fix what people refuse to face. It's something I had to learn the hard way. For years, I kept shrinking myself to keep the peace. I thought if I stayed agreeable, they'd eventually let me back in. But peace without boundaries isn't peace. It's permission for people to treat you however they want. So I began practicing saying no. Not out loud at first, just quietly in how I spent my time, who I took calls from, what invitations I accepted, and which ones I didn't. That's what this reunion was really, not a declaration of power, but a practice in boundaries. Reclaiming what I loved, the lake house, the memories without giving up, who I had become to do it. And slowly it seemed they were beginning to understand. Because when people see that your kindness is no longer tied to compliance, they start to meet you differently. With care, with awareness, sometimes even with apology. It wasn't Amelia or Dad who spoke first that evening during our reflection circle, a quiet hour I scheduled on the back deck overlooking the lake just before sunset. The moment felt gentle but charged, like the air right before a summer storm. I had expected awkwardness, maybe even resistance. But what I didn't expect was Grayson, the youngest of us, all the cousin who never made much noise, who was often assigned to kids' table duties well into his 20s, cleared his throat and looked right at me. I remember one Christmas he said slowly, "When you got that award from your company and brought it home. No one asked you about it, but I watched you slip it back into your suitcase the next day. I should have said something. I thought it was cool, Harper." Silence followed, not heavy, just honest. Then Eli nodded. "She always showed up for us," he said, voice low, even when we didn't notice. Amelia, for once, looked unsure. "I think I got used to thinking you'd always be okay, that you didn't need anything. But everyone needs something," Mom whispered. And there it was, the shift. Not a grand apology, but the kind of moment where someone finally stops talking and starts seeing. We're taught in so many families that vulnerability has to look a certain way, a breakdown, a fight, a confession. But sometimes it's a quiet sentence on a porch, a younger cousin remembering something you thought no one noticed. That night, I realized allies don't always arrive in full armor. Sometimes they're quiet witnesses watching from the edges until they find the courage to step forward. And once they do, things begin to change. By Sunday, something had shifted in the air, subtle but real. Conversations were less forced. Laughter came easier. And for the first time in years, I felt like we were all showing up, not as roles we'd been assigned: the achiever, the favorite, the quiet one, but as actual people. People willing to listen, stumble, and try again. Amelia came to find me while I was wrapping up a call from Tokyo. She looked hesitant, which wasn't like her. "I've been thinking about what you said," she started, "about how we only ever talked about my life. I never meant to shut you out." "I know," I replied softly, "but that doesn't mean it didn't happen." She nodded, not defensive, just honest. "I want to do better, if you'll let me." That's the thing about healing. It doesn't come in grand gestures. It arrives in small moments: a look, a pause, a changed behavior. And in those moments, you realize you're not fighting to be included anymore. You're choosing whether to invite people into the life you've built. Later that afternoon, we gathered for one last group photo on the deck. This time, no one forgot to call my name. I didn't have to stand at the edge or adjust the timer. I was in the center, not because I demanded it, but because I finally believed I belonged there. This reunion, it wasn't just a gathering. It was a mirror, one that reflected not who we used to be, but who we might still become. Because reconciliation isn't about returning to what was. It's about building something new together, even if the pieces don't fit perfectly the first time. And as I packed my bags for Hong Kong, I realized something else. The next chapter wasn't just mine, it could be ours. If they chose to turn the page with me. The morning I left for Hong Kong, the house was still not silent in a cold way, but settled, like something had finally landed after years of hovering in the air. My suitcase stood by the door, my passport tucked neatly beside it, and a stack of handwritten notes rested on the kitchen counter, one for each family member. Not because I had to explain myself, but because I wanted to leave something softer behind than silence. Mom was the first to rise. She didn't say much, just hugged me longer than usual and slipped a small photo into my hand. It was from one of the first reunions, me maybe 8 years old, grinning while holding a sparkler standing at the edge of the group. "You've always belonged," she said, voice catching. "We just didn't see it soon enough." This time I didn't flinch, I know. The car pulled up, and as I stepped into the morning light, I realized the house behind me didn't carry the same weight anymore. It wasn't a place of rejection now, it was a monument to return, to boundaries, to growth, to everything I rebuilt without applause and eventually with acceptance. Here's what I've come to believe: a seat at the table means nothing if it comes with conditions on who you're allowed to be. True belonging happens when you bring your full self, voice, values, victories, and the room adjusts. And if it doesn't, then you build your own table, set your own places, and you leave the door open not for approval but for possibility. As my plane lifted over the clouds, I looked down at the winding roads leading away from the lake. I smiled, not because I'd won, but because I'd chosen. And that more than any headline or title is the legacy that lasts. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or left out, know this: your value isn't tied to someone else's invitation. You are allowed to create your own space, your own joy, your own rules. And when you do, don't be surprised if the people who once overlooked you ask for directions to get there. If this story resonated with you, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from and what kind of table you're building in your own life. because we're not just telling stories here, we're reclaiming the right to be seen. See you in the next one.